The rain came down in sheets a day. Elina stepped back into the village she once called home, the downpour washing the dust from the crooked signs and broken pathways like a quiet blessing from the sky. Everything felt smaller now. The tea stall where her father once played chess with neighbors, the old banyan tree that had shaded her childhood dreams, and the rusted gate of the school she'd been expelled from in disgrace. 12 years had passed since she'd been exiled from this place, accused of a scandal that bore someone else's sins. At 17, she had been the subject of rumors, whispered judgments, and cruel stares, branded as a seductress, a liar, and a thief, not because she was guilty, but because the truth was too dangerous for the powerful to bear. The truth that Sehgal, the beloved son of the village elder, the rising political golden boy, had assaulted her behind closed doors and threatened her into silence, then spun a tale that painted her as a temptress who tried to ruin his reputation out of jealousy. With his wealth, charm, and powerful father, Rian crushed her voice before it ever found the courage to speak. Her father had died of shame within the year. Her mother fell into depression, and Elina was sent away to distant relatives in a city that didn't know her name. But time, like the rain, has a way of cleansing even the deepest wounds if one is patient enough. Elina hadn't just survived the exile, she had thrived in it. Armed with a law degree, internships under human rights, lawyers, and a mind sharper than any blade, she had built herself piece by piece from the ashes of humiliation. Her return wasn't an accident. It was the beginning of something precise, poetic, and long overdue. She walked calmly through the streets, her eyes absorbing every familiar crack in the walls, every person who pretended not to notice her presence. They recognized her, of course, they always had. The girl who had almost ruined the Sehgal boy. Only now she wasn't a girl anymore, and she wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to be remembered. The first thread of her revenge began quietly with a job posting at the newly established Sehgal Foundation, School for Underprivileged Girls, an attempt by Rian's now political campaign, teamed to polish his public image ahead of state elections. Elina applied using a different surname, presented as a progressive education consultant from Delhi, and walked straight through the same gates she'd once been barred from, now welcomed by banners bearing the name of her abuser. Rian didn't recognize her at first, her long braid now replaced by a sleek bun, her timid gaze replaced with sharp confidence, but she recognized the smirk he still wore, the kind of smirk that believed the world owed him forgiveness without confession. Over weeks, she embedded herself in the project, subtly earning the trust of his fiancée, Priya, a sweet, sincere woman who seemed unaware of the monster behind the polished smile. Elina found the weak threads effortlessly, how Rian had doctored scholarships, siphoned donation money into shell accounts, and pressured victims into silence through threats and fabricated contracts. She copied files, recorded meetings, and, with the help of a small but loyal group of advocates in the city, prepared a report too thorough to dismiss. Her trap was almost ready. But the sweetest part of her plan wasn't in the documents, it was in the people. She began organizing late-night workshops for the village's women, under the guise of education. She taught them about consent, law, courage. Slowly, they began sharing their stories, whispers of abuse, control, shame. And then, one night, under the same banyan tree where Elina once hid her tears, a former maid of the Sehgal family broke down and confessed. Rian had hurt her too. That was the moment Elina knew this wasn't just her story. It was theirs. And it was time to let the world hear it. Elina stood before the mirror in the small room she rented above the clinic, her reflection no longer fragile, no longer haunted by the past, but calm, calculating, ready. The documents she had prepared were stacked neatly in her bag, a quiet storm of evidence waiting to break over the Sehgal empire. In the weeks since she had returned, she had collected enough to sink Rian's career, if not his entire future. But the weight of justice wasn't just about exposure. It was about how it was revealed, who was watching, and what it would mean for the women who had suffered in silence. It had to be public. It had to be undeniable. So she waited, biding her time, deepening her bond with Priya, Rian's unsuspecting fiancé, until the girl began confiding in her about the strange disappearances of funds, Rian's sudden mood swings, and the controlling grip he had on every part of her life. "He gets angry when I question things," Priya had said once, her voice trembling beneath her carefully painted smile. "But he says it's love." Elina knew that tone too well. It was the same voice her 17-year-old self had once used, trying to explain the unexplainable. That same evening, Elina left a small, anonymous envelope on Priya's desk, containing only a flash drive and a note, "You deserve to know who you're marrying." She didn't wait for a reply, didn't need to. The very next morning, the news began to spread, not in gossip, but in headlines. Her advocate friend, Mayor, had submitted the entire corruption dossier to a national newspaper under the title, "The Shadows Behind the Sehgal Smile." It detailed years of misuse of charitable funds, testimonies from former female employees, and screenshots of silence complaints, all tied directly to Rian Sehgal's signature. Social media exploded. News vans flooded the quiet village streets. The Sehgal Foundation building, which had opened to so much fanfare, now stood as a symbol of disgrace. But it didn't end there. The biggest blow came when Priya, with shaking hands and tears on her face, held a press conference in front of the school building, flanked by journalists and surrounded by the very girls the foundation claimed to protect. She read from the note Elina had left her and then added her own. "I believed in a man who wore masks. But the real heroes are the women who refuse to stay quiet. The real strength is in those who come back not to forget, but to hold the mirror up to power." Elina stood in the back of the crowd, hood over her head, invisible in her presence, but monumental in impact. She felt no pride, only resolve. It wasn't over yet. As the village reeled, Rian tried to fight back. He issued statements denying the claims, blaming political sabotage, trying to buy silence from the staff Elina had empowered. But the voices were louder now. The women who once watched from behind curtains now stood in the open. They shared stories. They named names. The maid, the school librarian, even the secretary from his father's office. They all came forward. And Elina, still hidden in plain sight, kept feeding the fire with more bank statements, property papers, legal loopholes that now closed around Rian's neck like a noose. The final blow came at a town hall meeting, called by Rian's father, Mr. Sehgal, who had once ruled the village like a benevolent king. He tried to calm the people, to smooth things over. But then Elina stepped forward from the crowd, pulled back her hood, and said clearly, "Do you remember me, sir?" The silence was deafening. All eyes turned to her. Mr. Sehgal's face drained of color. "Elina Joshi, you told my father he raised a disgrace. You told the village I was a stain. And you believed your son without question." Rian, sitting nearby, stood up abruptly, ready to shout anything, but Elina raised her voice first. "I was 17 when your son hurt me, and he told me if I ever spoke, no one would believe me. That your money would erase me. That I'd be forgotten." Her voice didn't tremble. "But I am not forgotten. I am the voice of every girl who cried in silence while you celebrated lies, and today you can't erase me. Today, I erase you." She turned and walked away as the crowd erupted, not with rage, but with applause. The weight of silence had finally cracked, and what came pouring out was not fear, but fury and freedom. Rian Sehgal's fall was neither quick nor clean. It was slow, excruciating, and public, dragged out like an unraveling performance where the curtain never quite fell. In the days that followed the town hall confrontation, more allegations emerged from nearby towns and cities where Rian had once held internships, board positions, and mentorships. Women who had buried their voices out of fear now found strength in Elina's defiance, and like an echo growing louder with every repetition, the silence around him finally shattered. Political posters bearing Rian's confident grin were torn down overnight, replaced by angry scrawls that read liar and predator. His father resigned from the village council amid mounting pressure and disgrace, while his party distanced themselves with fake sympathy and quiet desperation. But Elina did not rejoice. Revenge, she had learned, was not a climax, it was a process, and healing did not come with the exposure of a villain, but from the restoration of truth. Still, a part of her, a deeply buried ember in her chest, flickered with satisfaction when Rian was arrested not just for financial fraud, but under the new testimonies of abuse, coercion, and defamation. She attended the hearing dressed in calm white, the same color they once said she wore to seduce. This time she wore it as armor, as proof that she was no longer bound by their narratives. The judge allowed her to speak once, during the bail hearing. The room was filled with journalists, lawyers, curious villagers, and a few scattered men who still held on to outdated beliefs. Elina's voice, however, cut through them like wind through dry leaves. You once told me that the world forgets. Girls like me. That we are erased by power, replaced by shame, and reduced to stories others tell on our behalf. But today I stand here to reclaim that story. Not just mine, but all of ours. Rian refused to meet her eyes. She continued, I do not seek your apology, because apologies are for those who understand what they destroyed. You never did. And now the world will write your story for you, the same way you tried to write mine. The judge denied him bail. Elina didn't wait for the press conference. She walked straight out of the courthouse and into a future that no longer felt like borrowed air. Back in the village, things began to shift slowly. The Sehgal Foundation School closed indefinitely, and with the funds retrieved from Rian's frozen accounts, a new center was built not in his name, but in the name of every silenced girl who came forward. Elina insisted it be called Arrow, meaning ascent. It would be a school, a shelter, a library, and a legal aid center all. In one run by the very women once discarded. She poured herself into the work hiring counselors, writing grant proposals, and building programs from the ground up. In just 6 months, Arrow had not only become a refuge, but a revolution. Teenage girls once afraid to speak up now gave speeches on stage. Widows who were never taught to read now helped other women learn how to write affidavits. Mothers began to walk their daughters to school with pride instead of shame. Elina was no longer just the girl who had been wronged. She was a guide, a leader, a symbol of the village's rebirth. One evening, just before monsoon, as dark clouds stretched across the horizon and a warm breeze curled through the air, Elina sat alone on the school's rooftop, watching the town below glow in the golden light. The same banyan tree where her voice had been silenced now stood like a guardian beside the entrance to Arrow. A girl of 12 came and sat beside her, barefoot, shy. Dee, she whispered, is it true that you were once afraid like me? Elina looked at her, her eyes soft. Yes, she said. More than anything. The girl fidgeted with her skirt. But you don't look afraid now. Elina smiled, placing a hand over the girl's. That's because I remembered that fear only wins when we stop walking forward. And we don't stop, not now, not ever. That night, as rain poured over the rooftops and thunder shook the walls, Elina stood by the open window of her small room and finally cried not from pain, but from release. Her tears fell not for the girl she had been, but for the thousands she now stood for. She had turned her sorrow into strength, her silence into song, and her shame into a movement. And though the storm raged outside, inside her there was peace. Months turned to a year, and Elina's name, once spoken in hushed tones and cruel whispers, was now uttered with respect and quiet reverence. Arrow became more than a school, it became a sanctuary, a revolution disguised as routine, where every morning began with laughter instead of fear, and every evening ended with young voices echoing in confidence rather than silence. Across the country, publications wrote features titled The Girl Who Came Back and Elina Joshi from Scandal to Strength. She was invited to panels, honored at women's forums, asked to speak at universities. But she never left the village, not fully. Her roots, torn once by betrayal, had grown back stronger, deeper, intertwining with every brick and soul she had helped heal. Justice had come, but healing was a slower, gentler thing. Not shouted from rooftops, but nurtured in everyday moments, in teaching an old woman to sign her name, in helping a young girl report abuse without fear, in planting saplings where there were once scars. Rian Sehgal's trial became a national event. Elina didn't attend every session. She didn't need to, but she made sure the women who testified were protected, their stories honored and their truths recorded. One by one, their voices painted the portrait of a man who had operated behind masks for too long, and when the final verdict came, sentencing him to 16 years without parole, there was no applause in the courtroom. Just silence, the kind that settles only when a heavy storm passes, leaving the world quiet in its wake. Elina sat outside the courtroom on the final day, not inside. She didn't need to see him again. She needed to feel the wind, to look up at the sky, to remember who she had become without ever needing to see him fall to prove it. In time, the Sehgal family home was sold, their political legacy erased, their name now a cautionary tale rather than a mark of power. Priya, once poised to marry into that empire, became one of Arrow's biggest supporters, funding legal literacy programs for rural girls and mentoring survivors. She and Elina grew close not out of shared trauma, but out of mutual belief that the future deserved more than what the past had offered. On the first anniversary of Arrow's founding, the entire village gathered beneath the banyan tree where it had all begun. Lanterns lit the twilight, and the girls performed a play based on Elina's story, only this time, the ending was not tragedy, but triumph. Elina sat in the front row, eyes shimmering as she watched a younger version of herself on stage stand tall and say the words she'd once been too afraid to say. You cannot break what was born to rise. As night fell, someone from the audience handed Elina a single white envelope. No name, no message, just a photograph inside. It was of her father, smiling in front of their old home, his arm around a teenage Elina whose eyes still held hope. She clutched it to her chest, the tears coming gently, like a blessing. That photo became the first thing hung in her office the next morning, a reminder of the promise she had made not only to herself, but to him. Years later, when people told her she was a symbol, she would smile and say, I'm not a symbol. I'm just a girl who remembered. And when they asked her what she remembered, she would answer softly, that silence is where they hoped I'd stay. But I chose to speak, and I'll never stop. And so, as the jacaranda trees bloomed year after year outside Arrow's front gate, purple blossoms falling like confetti onto the stone path where girls in uniforms now ran freely, Elina stood watching, her hands in her pockets, her heart steady. She had not just avenged her past, she had rewritten it. She had not just silenced her abuser. She had uplifted an entire generation to never be silenced again.